Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Lager Line, brought to you, as always, courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. I'm also joined by our new co-host, Paulo Alves, who you can follow on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA, one of the best Rockets and Astros fans in Portugal. We're talking NBA because that's what we do on this podcast, but we're recording this Thursday night, 24 hours before Game 1 of the World Series. Paulo, I'm guessing that even though the Rockets have a game Friday night, you're probably going to be a bit more invested in Astros-Phillies Game 1, correct?
Yeah, last time they played at the same time, I had them both on the screen, but I had to watch the Rockets game back again the day after because it's just it's too intense. Although I will say it's too intense, but it shouldn't be because the Astros are going to sweep them anyway. So it's just me overreacting.
Yeah, the perfect postseason. And by the way, let's be really optimistic. Astros-Phillies starts at 7 p.m. Friday night. Rockets-Blazers doesn't start until about 9:10. So there's about a 2-hour and 10-minute gap. Let's hope the Astros are up by 5+ runs by the time that the Rockets tip off. And that way it's a little bit easier to pay attention to the Rockets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you get to the bullpen by that time, we're safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with this bullpen, the way they've pitched in the postseason, just absolutely ridiculous. Hector Neris, Ryan Presley, Rafael Montero, Brian Abreu, Ryan Stanek. The back end of that bullpen is just filthy. Anyway, let's talk about the Rockets, who have been decidedly less filthy, but it's not all bad. As we're recording this a little over a week into the season, the Rockets are 1-4, but let's throw out some caveats. It has not been an easy schedule. The first 3 games of the year, we knew that was going to be brutal. A 3-4 night stretch, 3 different cities, including a back-to-back against Atlanta, Milwaukee, and Memphis, all likely playoff teams, and Milwaukee, night 2 of a back-to-back, a split back-to-back at that. That's probably the title favorite right now. So that was just a brutal draw out of the gate for the Rockets, and they lost Alperen Sengun to an illness midway through that. They also had Jae'Sean Tate for none of that opening 3-game stretch, just got him back last night in Utah. The last 2 games against the Jazz, a home and home. Rockets won on their home floor, lost in Salt Lake City. So that's where you get to 1-4. The schedule, though, again, did not do them any favors. If you looked at the schedule objectively going in, I'm guessing most people would have probably thought 1-4 because you're decided underdogs in those first 3 games, a 3-4 night stretch at that, 2 on the road, and then this home and home with Utah. To this point, Utah is 4-1, the opposite of the Rockets at 1-4, but Utah for the season as a whole, they have a few more veterans than the Rockets do, but they're supposed to be in the bottom tier of the West with the Rockets. So I think most people would have looked at that home and home and said a split with each team winning on its home court feels about right. And basically that's what's happened. And it is important to note the Rockets have been largely competitive in all of these games. The only one that really got out of hand was that one in Milwaukee that they lost by 20. And again, that's night 2 of a split back-to-back, 3rd game in 4 nights. A lot of these guys aren't up to par on conditioning yet, not because they weren't working out. It just hasn't even been a month since training camp started. That's just par for the course. So they are 1-4, but some of that is just a bit of an unfriendly schedule out of the gate. When you look at the numbers underneath the hood, if you will, and besides just who they played, how did they get to 1-4? The upshot compared to a year ago, the Rockets in the 2021 to 2022 season ranked 30th, dead last in defensive rating, and 26th on offense. The good news through the first 5 games, they have absolutely improved on defense, going from 30th to 20th. The bad news is that they are still, as we're recording this Thursday night, maybe this changes a bit based on results tonight, but certainly not going to change dramatically. The Rockets are still 26th in offensive rating, identical to where they were a year ago. And it makes me think of our podcast that we just did with Matt Moore, who talked about when he did the film study on the Rockets, seeing a bit more potential defensively than offensively, which I thought was interesting because other than Jabari Smith, and he's a rookie, so many of your blue chip or close to blue chip prospects, Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Alperen Sengun, you tend to think of them as more offense first, yet it's the defensive end of the court where you have seen some growth. Now, maybe some of that's because Eric Gordon, well, he hasn't quite shown it this year, but can be a good defender. And we've seen some strides in terms of the team defense as well. They have Jae'Sean Tate back now. But for a team that has a lot of intriguing scoring prospects, they haven't really taken a big step as a unit on offense. The last couple of games without Sengun have devolved into a bit more iso ball, perhaps because you're playing Jabari Smith as a small ball 5. You don't have Bruno Fernando either. So the floor is spaced, and guys like KPJ and Jalen and Eric Gordon, too, for that matter, are getting a bit more into sort of isolation habits, perhaps to the detriment of the team at times. There's a lot of plausible reasons, but the bottom line is, to this point in the year, the defense, while not perfect, it has taken a step forward. The offense clearly has not. There's a lot of consternation on social media about Stephen Silas. If you search his name on Twitter, you will find some unfriendly mentions. It is early in the year, but again, this is all we have to go on. So I guess, Paulo, I'll start you with a macro question before we dive into the micro and some of the individual players and combinations. What do you see as wrong with this offense right now, and what are some of the things that they can do schematically to perhaps try and take a step forward as we get ready for the coming games?
Yeah, it's weird because depending on which game you go back and watch, different things arise as the problem. And it's a really small sample size, right? And I'm usually a pretty positive guy. Usually, as long as you're losing the games, right, and you're still like improving your draft odds, and usually I'm not too concerned. But this season, it's just been different because last season I kind of just shelved a lot of the concerns as, hey, Christian Wood's not trying hard enough. Christian Wood's not taking the challenge defensively, and so a lot of this falls apart because Christian Wood's not, contributing the way that he should, and so if there's a hole that big, you can kind of understand.
And as a quick interjection, perhaps the absence of Christian Wood is why you've taken a step forward defensively. Is that fair?
I think so as well, but I think we've taken a step forward defensively, and we still are not a good defensive team. But right. The surprising part about that is it feels like it's a lot easier to see. It feels like we got rid of this big problem, and now we're seeing a lot of the smaller problems like creeping in. And just off the top of my head, we've seen, and KPJ was guilty of this last season as well, but we've seen KPJ go over screen on guys that you should never go over screens on. The Dejounte Murray, Ja Morant, these are guys that they're really quick, they're really good drivers, deadly mid-range floater game. Those are the type of guys that you want to kind of go under the screen. And if they're making the threes as Ja Morant was when he was playing against us, goddamn, you kind of live with it, right? Mm-hmm. But you've got to do that, consistently all game, because that's when the sample size becomes big enough that if he's hot, you start to get some returns back. We see mistakes like those all the time. We've seen guys just not be on the same page when it comes to if they're switching or if they're not, and that leads to wide open threes galore. We see sometimes even the schemes, from a scheme standpoint, we're playing, for example, Jabari Smith at the 5, who is someone who is notable for being a good perimeter defender, and his switchability is a big part of the appeal when you're drafting him. But you bring him on as a small ball 5 and you're still running drop coverage, and that's kind of doesn't make much sense. You're not really adapting to the personnel that you're playing with, and sometimes playing against as well. We play Garuba, who's at some small ball 5 sometimes. That's another guy that you should be switching with, and sometimes they're not switching. And maybe it's the inconsistency in the schemes they're running. Maybe it's just that it's an inexperienced team. But you start seeing a lot more trends on what's going wrong. So much so that I would say that right now our best defender is probably the most unlikely guy. If you ask anybody at the start of the season, I would say our best defender right now is Jalen Green. He's always trying. That's one thing that's consistent with him. He has the tools to stay in front of guys. He does get killed on screen sometimes because
and his off ball is an issue.
Yeah, he gets lost a little bit off ball as well. But other than that, just looking at the team, like Jabari is getting acclimated. You can tell that he's getting acclimated. He's going to be an insane defender. But right now, he's just, he gets blown by sometimes. He gets caught flat-footed. Sometimes he just seems like he's not ready for what the other player was. I remember vividly against Atlanta, against John Collins. He was giving up basically everything that John Collins does. Like, John Collins is not a really creative offensive player, but he was still getting his against Jabari. Eric Gordon, to me, is a shell of himself defensively. Even on the ball, like sometimes we see the glimpses of old Eric Gordon, a guy that's really going to stop you one-on-one. Off the ball, he's just completely, his effort level is just not there at all. We see rebounds just like fly right by him. He doesn't even make an attempt at getting them. So defensively, while we see improvement compared to last season, because last season was just a complete nightmare, you still see a lot of things that you can pinpoint quickly just rewatching a game that can be improved. And then offensively, it's boiling down to a lot of ISO, which is not bad in some capacity, right? If you're running 5 out, that's what you're planning to get. You're planning to get ISO. And it's not bad if you have Jalen Green switched on Lauri Markkanen, for example, as we saw last game for a few times. And we saw Jalen Green get switched on Lauri Markkanen, and the team doesn't realize that he got that switch, and so they don't feed him, and he passes off because somewhere else on the court someone's doing another action that's completely unnecessary because Jalen already got the matchup he wanted. We're not capitalizing on it. Sometimes the spacing in the 5 out is messed up because they're running 5 out with Daishen Nix, and so you don't have someone on the dunker spot, you don't have someone screening, but then you also don't have the complete 5 out spacing because someone's signing off of Daishen Nix. We saw this in multiple possessions last night, and so the spacing sometimes feels off, and you don't quite realize what it is in the moment. But when you go and look specifically, you see that it's these small things. And I don't know, those first few games, the first 2 games look really exciting. They were, keeping up with these really good teams. But you've got to wonder, during those games, Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. were shooting lights out from 3. Like it was in no way sustainable. And they still haven't come down quite to, league average levels. But you've got to wonder how much of that was just, hey, these guys are really talented. And on any given night, they're going to, show that talent. And regardless of what the offense looks like, they're going to make it work. But I feel like the last couple of games against the Jazz, who are not a great team, especially defensively, we're talking about a team that was known last year as a team that has really good interior defense with Rudy Gobert and really bad perimeter defense. They got rid of one of their best perimeter defenders in Royce O'Neal. Bojan Bogdanovic is a respected defender, although he's, on the bad side of 30 already. And they brought on Kelly Olynyk, Malik Beasley. They've brought on, these Talon Horton Tucker, these like scrap players that came as salary filler. I don't expect this to be a really good defensive team at the end of the year. And so even the first game that we won, it felt like more that the Jazz lost it rather than us winning it because the Jazz were coming off, I think it was a back-to-back. Right. They had played, I think, 4 games in 6 days or something close to that. And the Rockets themselves had played a lot coming into that game, but it really felt like that game was, the Jazz just couldn't do anything, and so we won rather than us beating them. And it's not a bad thing. Right, I'm not upset at losing. We have Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson coming up in the draft, but I think you want to lose with progress. You want to lose with the process. You want to see, like, the first 2 games we saw okay, the offense has a process. These guys are generating the open looks, but they're not good enough to capitalize on them. The first 2 games we saw KPJ and Jalen, it was a really strong narrative that KPJ and Jalen just weren't seeing Jabari Smith or whoever the corner shooter was, Tari Eason as well. They weren't seeing the corners. They weren't making that pass. And so the offense was clunky because it was, crystal clear. Okay, these guys are just not good enough yet to execute. The last few games, it looked like they haven't been generating those shots. It's not like they're missing like obvious reads. It's just it seems like they're not creating the advantages that they should. And so that's more where I come from when I'm a little bit disappointed with Stephen Silas, because people usually bring up it's 5 games into the season, and that's okay. But it's also at this point 87 games into what you should call Stephen Silas's real actual coaching reign, because you can't really count the first season for all the reasons that we've discussed. Through 87 games with largely the same roster, changing a couple of rookies, you'd expect a little bit of more, continuous progress than what we've seen. But at the end of the day, that's maybe a little bit of a micro thing when, in the grand scheme of things, perhaps the draft pick is more important. But yeah, it's not been too encouraging to start the season. Perhaps I've had people tell me this on Twitter. Perhaps I've been spoiled by the Astros and I'm expecting the Rockets to be too good too soon.
There you go. That's one way to spin it for sure. I will say defensively, the reason that I'm fairly encouraged, it's not just the raw numbers, but it's the context. I think Jabari Smith Jr. is definitely going to get better defensively the more he plays. You almost never see a rookie, even if they're touted as being a high-impact two-way player, which Jabari can be. That was part of his appeal. Even those guys, very rarely, with some occasional exceptions like Herb Jones a year ago, it typically takes them, if not a year or two, at least half a season to really get up to speed. That side of the ball is just so damn tough when you're 19 years old, and especially if your body is a bit underdeveloped physically, which his is. So I'm not too alarmed by Jabari being, and he hasn't been bad. I would say just sort of defensively, not really giving the true two-way. But again, you couldn't really expect that. I think as the year progresses, and especially future years, you're going to get a lot more from Jabari Smith Jr. and also Jae'Sean Tate, who's one of your best defenders. You've only had him for 1 game out of 5, and that was for 20 minutes because his minutes were a bit limited coming off the ankle issue. So I think as Jae'Sean Tate gets more reps and you see Jabari gradually getting better, I think there's room for more optimism with the defense, and you're already seeing some strides. They're not good defensively, but going from 30th to 20th, that's definitely steps in the right direction. As far as offense, I tend to agree with you about the lack of structure and the isolation heavy style, and some of their success coming from simply shooting well as opposed to really having a cohesive system. Kevin Porter Jr. shooting 40% on threes. Jalen, even after struggling in Utah, is still shooting nearly 42%. So it's fair to question how much is truly from the system and how much is just making some shots. And if that declines to, not saying it's going to decline a lot, but at least let's say like upper 30s instead of low 40s, then what does that mean for the offense as a whole? That's a fair question. Now, again, it is early in the season. They have had a relatively rough schedule, but the counter to that, as you mentioned, a lot of these guys have been in the system for a year. So it is fair to sort of say, hey, this should be going a bit better. There should be more cohesion early in the year than some teams that don't have the chemistry that the Rockets have from being together most of last season and practicing together during the summer. We heard that as a theme a lot. So in theory, the Rockets should, even as young as they are, perhaps be a step ahead of a few teams because they had fewer off-season changes. And to this point, they certainly haven't taken a step back, but I don't think they've taken the step forward that a lot of us wanted to see. It is early. Hopefully the remainder of this road trip, Trailblazers, Suns, Clippers, not exactly an easy schedule, not only playing on the road, but those are 3 winning teams, although the Blazers won't have Damian Lillard. Perhaps that will help. As far as the offense, aside from just the isolation heavy play, which you hear that as a common critique, and maybe some of that is based on not having Sengun. So with Jabari at the 5, then it's 5 out and some of the guards sort of take the bait of, oh, there's all this space, let me go into the paint and try to create one-on-one, put my own mixtape together and you're not running the system. Last night, the Jazz actually had 5 more 3-point attempts than the Rockets, which is a bit unusual for the way the Rockets want to play. And I think some of that can be attributed to being a bit more isolation heavy and trying to get into the paint and take those mid-range shots, as opposed to trying to get threes through ball movement, which is the way you would like to see them play. And whenever you have these critiques, aside from the coach, the other position that's going to be scrutinized a lot is point guard. And of course, with Kevin Porter Jr., there's some narratives baked into this, because ever since the Rockets appointed him before last season to be a full-time point guard for the first time, there's been this question of long-term, is he really a starting point guard, or is he a wing/sixth man? Can he be the primary ball handler and facilitator a year or two from now when you're really trying to win at a high level? And of course, the reviews are mixed to this point. The good news this season, he has taken a step forward as a scorer and as a shooter. Last year, he averaged 15.6 points per game. To this point, he's averaging 21.4. The three-point shooting, which was actually very good last year at 37.5%, and better than that, 99th percentile catch and shoot. He's taken yet another leap forward early in the season, now shooting 40% from three on an average of 5 attempts per game. That's the good news. The bad is that the assists have actually gone down a smidge from 6.2 to 5.4, turnovers up from 3.1 to 3.6. And again, it's not fair to put it all on his shoulders, because the coach has a role and there's other guys that need to play make at times as well. I know Jalen Green has not been as great in the pick and roll as a lot of us would like to think that he will be in time. Maybe that time is not the first week or so of year 2 when he's just 20 years old. But as far as KPJ as your point guard, again, there's clearly some positives. The shooting, the scoring, that's clearly there. The defense, it's mixed, but you can see at times the tools are certainly there. And you don't have any big commitment. The contract is taken care of. It's very team friendly. So you're not having to worry about, well, what does this mean long term? No, you can fit him in, whether he's a point guard, a six man, a wing. You can find a way to fit him in on that contract, which is super team friendly in terms of control, barely over MLE money. So I think long term, there's a role for Kevin Porter Jr. no matter what, assuming he stays on the straight and narrow. But as far as Kevin Porter Jr., the point guard, what have you thought about him through the first 5 games?
Yeah, it's been really good on some fronts, pretty poor on other fronts. I thought he was further along the way when it comes to his floor vision. Just the first year that he was here, and even last year, we saw him struggle, but then he picked it back up, and he was legitimately good as a point guard for, I would say, probably the second half of the season. But what I've got from him is, I think that contract is going to be worth the base level of it at the very least. I think he's just shown to be an incredibly gifted scorer of the ball. He'll be better than what Eric Gordon was during the Harden contending years. I'm fairly confident of that. He's just more gifted as a scorer. He's taller, he's lengthier, and I think as he matures, I think we've got, like, at the very least a six man in there locked up, and a very good one at that, especially at that price. When it comes to actually his play, scoring wise, I'm encouraged to see that he is finally getting to the line a little bit more. He's getting 5 free throw attempts per game, which is good. It's a lot better than his previous mark at 3.2. But I need to see that even more. And why do I say this? The Rockets struggle a lot with guys that just sit in the paint and block shots. Walker Kessler, Brook Lopez, Clint Capella, Steven Adams, those types of guys. They struggle a lot because they get to the rim and there's not a lot of creativity there to finish around the shot blocker. They try. That's what the approach they're going with, but it's not working. And so what I need, and this goes for Jalen as well, I need him to be more aggressive going into the shot blocker's body and trying to draw contact or fouls. Every good scorer in the league gets to the line, basically. And that's a really important part of the game, because if you can confidently drive to the rim actually and draw fouls, then it changes the way the other team has to approach you. Because what teams are doing right now is the bigs drop back to the paint and they're daring these guys to shoot the mid-range shot or to shoot floaters, right? And that's a good shot to have as a pick and poison type of thing. You don't want to just be taking that shot all the time. The current NBA will very much live with you taking mid-range shot as your main form of scoring. And so I think getting to the line is really important. I think they've been largely non-creative with, or underdeveloped, I'll say, finishing at the rim. We've seen from KPJ a little floater this year, which is encouraging, and it's an important shot for him to have. But we've seen from both him and Jalen this year compared to last year that they're a lot more trigger happy when it comes to the mid-range shot. They take it out of control a lot more.
Agreed.
When last year it felt like, okay, they run the offense, and if they have a lot of space for a mid-range shot, they take it. And that's great. This year it feels more like they're going into the offense to trigger happy with that shot. It's a shot that's important to have, as I said before, as a pick or poison type of thing. But they've been trigger happy, and they haven't been making them. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but both KPJ and Jalen have struggled from that area of the floor, and that's a lot of why we look at their stat lines and we see incredible 3-point percentage, incredible free throw percentage, and then it's that rare thing where your field goal percentage is lower than your 3-point percentage, which means once you get inside the paint, you're just a mess, and that's what they've been. So offensively from KPJ, I need to see that. I need to see him see the corners more. The sloppy turnovers are still there to some extent, but they're not as bad as they were last season, where it was literally, like, to start the season, it was basically unwatchable. And defensively, as I said, I think he has the tools, but he's been overestimating a little bit of the tools that he has, I would say. Because he's playing against Ja Morant, for example. He's either guarding him like too close, basically from half court, in which case he doesn't have the shiftiness to keep up with a guy that's literally one of the best in the league. It just blows past him. And the alternative has been just playing way too far off the guy. And I think he needs to find a middle ground there where he knows what he's capable of. He knows how quick he can contest. But he also gives enough space to the defender as to not getting blown by. And that's been a problem with him specifically a lot this year. I think he's, trying to read into the psyche of it a little bit is, okay, we're trying on defense this year. I'm going to shut this guy down. And sometimes it's better to don't shut the guy down. Just get a good contest in, because against the best players in the league, that's all you can hope to do. You're not going to shut down, Ja Morant. He's too good. So just get a decent contest in and hope that he's not on one of those nights where he's just going to make everything.
So let me ask you a question that's a bit more positive about KPJ, although perhaps to the detriment of Jalen Green. We saw in the second half of the Utah game, Stephen Silas finally starting to stagger their minutes a bit more, perhaps because Daishen Nix as the backup point guard has not offered a whole lot. And so I think you need at least one of those playmakers on the floor. And at the end of the Jazz game that they lost in Salt Lake City, the Rockets were -3 in the 35 minutes that KPJ played and -19 in the 36 minutes that Jalen played, which tells you that the limited time that Jalen was out there without KPJ went absolutely terribly. For the season as a whole, it's even more stark than that, although they haven't had too much time apart, because really up until the last couple of games in various segments, they haven't done too much staggering. But for the year as a whole, when they have done it, the net on-off ratings for KPJ, it's -5. For Jalen, it's actually -25. Now, again, that's crazy early in the season, and even within these 5 games out of 82, they haven't really had that much time to compare in terms of Jalen on the court without KPJ and KPJ on the court without Jalen. But to this point, clearly the KPJ units without Jalen have been more effective than the Jalen units without KPJ. And it sort of, I think, dovetails with your earlier point that some of the rosy statistics are simply due to shooting well as opposed to actually functioning well as a unit. So I guess the positive to this, if you want to spin it in a good direction, is that, we know what Jalen Green can be. The talent is there. There's more questions long term with KPJ. And to this point, at least on some level, he's delivering on his promise in a way that even a year ago, maybe he didn't. So that's the good news. The bad news is that, to this point, Jalen's taken a step forward as a shooter, or really continuing what he did in the second half of his rookie season. But some of the other aspects of his game, particularly the pick and roll decisions and playmaking, isn't quite there yet. I know you can question the coaching staff some on that as well. But just at a macro level, why do you think that the KPJ lineups are faring better than the Jalen lineups, especially this past game in Utah?
So we've seen them basically not get staggered at all for the first few games.
Right.
And then we look at the games where they finally got staggered, right? And the first one was, or the second one, which was the last night, which is fresh around memory. KPJ came in and he was just destroying everything, right? He was being decisive. I think a large part of this differential is coming from that. And the second part is, hey, KPJ right now, he's just a better playmaker in comparison to Jalen Green. He's got 3 years in this league, 4 years now in this league. Jalen is going into his second, and so I think it's natural for him to be better, like in an island, and he's also like Jalen Green is more efficient in the way that he moves, in the sense of there's wiggle there, right? But most of the time, Jalen is just straight to the basket. And with KPJ, there's more time to change, the course of what you're doing, because it's not as much of a blur, and he's a little bit more methodic at this point in his career. So I think that has to do with it a little bit as well. And then it's such a small sample size that just that one run, this game, this last game, makes a huge difference. And you'd have to look into just the lineups in general. Who was playing with who. We saw, just for example, Eric Gordon and Garrison Mathews right now are second and fourth in the Rockets plus minus differential or net rating differential, right? If you watch them play, you wouldn't say so. But if you watched last game, you saw that there was a little bit of a period there. I think it was the second quarter, where all that was keeping them alive in that second unit were Garrison Mathews like curling off of screen and hitting insanely tough shots, and Eric Gordon just isoing to doing his typical over dribbling, just getting your shoulder into the shot blocker and just getting a layup in, right? Mm-hmm. So that game influences. You can tell by how high those guys are compared to the eye test, where anybody can tell you Garrison Mathews is absolutely getting targeted on defense every time down the floor. And Eric Gordon, he's not getting targeted on defense, so you can tell that he's really apathetic in the way that he's been played. So it's really tough to draw conclusions from such small sample sizes, because one run makes a huge difference.
Yeah, when I look at Gordon and Mathews in particular, it's fascinating because the eye test would tell you that Mathews is being targeted defensively and that Gordon's effort isn't there. I've seen it here and there, so I wouldn't say these necessarily declined even at 33 years old, 34 later this year, but clearly the commitment, and some of it may be very early in the season and the fitness isn't all the way there. So hopefully some of it comes around as the conditioning gets up to par and so on and so forth. But one of the interesting things is that, despite the eye test saying that these two are not really that impactful, and Garrison, other than the Utah game, has struggled as a shooter, they're actually two of your top four in differential net rating when they're on and off the court, and actually two of the top three if you exclude Jae'Sean Tate, who's only played 20 minutes the entire season, missed the first 4 games. And that's just really interesting to me, because even though individually you see these flaws, the Rockets function better as a unit with Gordon or Mathews out there. And I just find that really interesting, because again, individually you see the issues that are there, but yet somehow for the team as a whole, it's beneficial. And what it makes me think back to is the 5-out system. We talked about it earlier in the context of Jabari at the 5. We know that's Stephen Silas's preferred offense. It's what they ran in Dallas. And when they have those guys out there, the one thing that we can say about Eric Gordon and Garrison Mathews, regardless of their limitations defensively or Garrison Mathews missing shots, they are absolutely respected as shooters in terms of the spacing. So there is a net effect, but I guess also the question that comes with that, are the Rockets as a unit not finding ways to basically function without a 5-out offense, like we heard in training camp from the context of Alperen Sengun, basically a 4-and-1 instead of 5-out, and basically using Sengun as a hub in the low block or the mid-range. And even though they went into training camp wanting to make Alperen Sengun the starting center, of course we know that at the end of preseason they decided to sort of scrap that. And this sort of fits in that trend. It just feels like even though the Rockets would like, in theory, to have more athleticism, more defense, more playmaking, integrate guys like Tari Eason, like KJ Martin, although KJ Martin has developed as a shooter, so we shouldn't say that he's like a non-shooter. But in the perfect world, the Rockets wouldn't have to play this many shooters. It just feels like that, at least at this point, they're so not confident in their offense when they don't have those shooters out there that everything just sort of craters. So to me, it's one of those things that's like, yeah, the offense is better with Gordon and Mathews out there, but it also makes me wonder, is this sort of a negative from the standpoint of the Rockets just can't figure it out when they don't have those floor spacers? How do you look at that data?
It's weird because there's two things to shooting, right? There's making the shots, and there's like how respected you are for as a shooter. Because when you look at it, KJ Martin is a better shooter, but he just hasn't been knocking them down, right? This season he's been, I think he's 20-something% from three.
Yeah.
And well, that's gonna tank your on-off, but if he's getting these shots in the flow of the offense, which I think that he is, he's not forcing threes up, then these are shots that you live with. He's missing them right now, but you're okay with it because I count that as a good shot generator. If KJ gets an open three, that's fine with me. Same thing with Tari Eason. He's shooting 41% from three, I'm pretty sure. And hey, if your possession ended in a Tari Eason open three, then that's good as well. The thing that comes with Gordon and Mathews is that a lot of these are bailout threes. A lot of these are not getting created by the guards. These are getting created by either Eric Gordon just spotting up so deep, or that nobody expects him to shoot from there, or Garrison Mathews coming off a screen and shooting a completely off-balance three, which by his account, those seemingly go in more than just the normal catch and shoot ones. And so that dynamic of not just that they're better shooters, but the fact that they shoot in different circumstances is what I think is key here, because when they're hot, you can't stop it. You can't stop Garrison Mathews from coming out of a screen and shooting a three as deep as he does, completely off balance. The defense is going to live with that, but when he's hot, that's going to contribute to your plus minus. And in the team setting in general, most of the guys that are playing, I'm okay with them taking threes. Deshante just played last game, so we're not really sure how his shooting looks this season. Mm-hmm. But I don't really like 5-out. I prefer to run like a pick and roll big, because you need that rim pressure. Mm-hmm. And it's tougher to get that rim pressure when you're playing 5-out. But in general, I think it's as I said, it's more about the types of looks that they take and how well it works when they're hitting, rather than and how respected they are, rather than just the fact that they are better shooters, like percentage-wise.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the lineup moving forward, because we heard from Jonathan Fagan of the Houston Chronicle today there's going to be at least 2 to 3 more weeks without Bruno Fernando, who they put as starting center, to get that rim pressure, a real pick and roll lob threat. He's not going to be there because of knee tendonitis. They could move Sengun back into the starting lineup, but clearly on some level, Stephen Silas and the coaching staff seem to believe in him as a sixth man, as sort of the anchor of that second unit. In the short term, the last 2 games, they started Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5. I do think that's contributed to some of the heavy isolation play, because the floor is so spaced that there's some bad habits that can arise from your guards. I do think over time they can get more used to it and learn from their mistakes, and the coaching staff should, of course, be pointing them out when they do film study. So I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from that just yet. But As far as the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'm curious your thoughts. Do you let it ride with this small ball lineup when possible? Like we heard from the Milwaukee game, the reason they didn't start Jabari at the 5 was because they just didn't want to give him the responsibility of having to guard Giannis, which is just really, really difficult for a skinny 19-year-old, which Jabari is. They wanted Garuba at the 5 just because of the presence of Giannis, and obviously if you're going up against Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, that type of big man, not sure you want to throw a 6'11", 213-pound Jabari Smith at 19 years old as the primary interior big. So some of it's going to be dictated by matchups, but let's say for these matchups where there's not just an overwhelming post presence on the other team, do you want to see more of Jabari at the 5, or do you want to see something that's a little less 5 out? Perhaps moving Sengun back into the starting lineup temporarily, although the downside to that is that you're sort of yanking his role around if you ultimately plan to move him back to the bench when Bruno comes back. Perhaps it's better just to leave Sengun in that role and get him used to playing with those units and in those patterns of the game, late first, early second quarters, late third, early fourth, so on and so forth. You could also perhaps use Garuba, who hasn't played a ton, but has had some encouraging moments when he's been out there. Clearly needs to get better at catching the ball, but I think that's something that will come with reps. I don't think that's a fundamental flaw in his game. I think that's just some nerves and inexperience at the NBA level and playing with the guys that he's playing with now. So I guess until Bruno comes back for the next 2 to 3 weeks, let's sort of map out the 5 minutes and usage patterns. Do you go back to Sengun as a starter, or do you stick with small ball or perhaps Garuba? What's your lean given what we've seen the last few games?
To me, it depends on what you're planning to do when Bruno does come back. If when Bruno comes back, we know that Sengun as the 6th man is experimental. We never knew how long they planned to ride with that, and if they had it pre-planned at all. But if they plan to, when Bruno comes back, to start him back as the starting 5 and bring Sengun off the bench, then I would play Garuba. I think we are too inexperienced to just change schemes all the time. I think you should try to provide as much stability as you can. And right now, the closest thing to Bruno that we have is Garuba, and he's not the same lob threat. He's not the same just pick and roll partner, because as you said, he struggles to just grab the ball. But he is the closest in the sense that you're not going to play 5 out with Garuba. He's going to set screens. You're going to play pick and roll. It might go worse, right? But to me, that's more important. On the other hand, if you're not planning on when Bruno comes back, if by then it would be kind of the period where you plan to just have Sengun back in the starting 5 for some reason, then you should just go to Sengun as the starting 5 right now and just roll with it. He can do a lot of the stuff that Bruno can do. He's not the same lob threat, but he can, he has rolling gravity via his passing, via him being a better finisher. So you can give him as much space as you'd be able to give Bruno. So just try to keep it within the same framework as you were going to do is what I would say. And you also get a chance to see what you have in Garuba a little bit more. I think he looked great in against Milwaukee. I think he's just a hustle player. He's going to go in for rebounds, going to, you can play switching defense, which I think they were with Bruno, because Bruno is a pretty decent switch big as well. I would give it to Garuba if the plan is to stick with the pick and roll big.
Yeah, and personally, I think that I would too, because it's not just about those 5s in isolation. It's also about the other 4 players on the court. And even if they could work out of some of these heavy isolation patterns that we've seen ever since they moved Jabari to the 5, what is really the end goal if ultimately you're going to plug Bruno back into that role when he's back in 2 or 3 weeks, and then you have to start all over again? Garuba is a bit closer with Sengun, and perhaps he comes back Friday. It's not a long-term illness, so they're optimistic that he's going to rejoin them on the road trip, perhaps Friday in Portland. And if that's the case, it's easier for Sengun to keep his role constant, and then the other 4 players on the court Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, KPJ, Eric Gordon, perhaps Daishen Tate. We'll have to see what they do as far as the fifth starter when Eric Gordon and Daishen Tate are both available, which they haven't been in the regular season. But yeah, it's just easier for those guys to settle into their roles and get used to the spots that they need to be at on the floor and the decisions, the inflection points that they're going to be sort of tasked with over the course of a game if their role is similar to what it's going to be when Bruno comes back. The Jabari at the 5 on anything of a more permanent basis, I don't know that you should really try that unless it's something that you're truly going to stick with, which my guess is that for the most part this season they're not, with Jabari at 213 pounds. It's something that clearly long-term over his development is something that as the years progress, I think they'll gradually do more and more, but I don't know how much they're truly going to do this in year one. And with that in mind, I think Garuba makes a bit more sense. And it's just, use it as a blessing in disguise. With Bruno out, you can get some evaluation of Usman Garuba. And we talked about that before the season started, this sort of being a year in which, I know it's year 2, but with all this cap room next summer, you do need to have an idea of what you have in players like Usman Garuba. It's year 2, but you want to have at least some idea, because if you don't feel sold that he's a long-term rotation fit, then that's the type of spot that you can use your cap room to address next summer. So use it as sort of a blessing in disguise. Bruno isn't out there. Okay, that's a perfect way to play Garuba and see what you have there. And at the same time, you keep the other players in a more constant role relative to what it's going to be 34 weeks from now, when hopefully the full rotation is out there, which, in fairness to Stephen Silas, we should point out that he hasn't had his full rotation yet. They didn't have Daishen Tate start the year, haven't had Bruno Fernando or Alperen Sengun the last couple of days. So hopefully some of these things do get better once they're playing at full capacity, which most of the NBA is, because there aren't a ton of injuries in training camp typically, but the Rockets have been a bit of an outlier. Hopefully that changes in the weeks ahead and we get some more positive injury luck, and perhaps that leads to better results for the team as a whole. The last question on my list, as I look back at, these first 5 games and some of the statistics and the rotation patterns, there's a lot of fans that are wondering why Josh Christopher isn't playing more. And of course, Josh was taken just one slot after Garuba in the 2021 first round. So they have invested a decent bit in him. And for the same reasons, they want to have some understanding of what they have in Usman going into next offseason. The same is true with Josh Christopher as well. And Josh has played bit minutes, but it's been progressively less with each game, and only played a very small handful in Salt Lake City on Wednesday. And what's sort of interesting is that Josh isn't playing a lot, but Daishen Nix clearly is, even though Nix is not really delivering in those minutes. Now, in fairness, it's not like they're an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of their playing style. Josh, much more of a combo guard. We've heard that if everything went right, they sort of want the Drew Holiday template for him, whereas Daishen Nix a bit more of a traditional point guard. And so perhaps they want that element of stability to sort of just lead the second unit as a guy that doesn't want that many touches, can just get the ball to players in the right spots. Yet it doesn't really feel to me like Daishen Nix is doing all that great of a job at that. He's certainly not finishing or shooting at a high level either. And again, I think, just reading between the lines, my guess as to what's going on, and this goes all the way back to Summer League, is that while the Rockets probably view Josh Christopher as the better talent relative to Nix individually, there's a reason Josh was drafted in the first round in 2021 while Daishen Nix went undrafted. At the same time, I feel like that they view Nix as being more understanding of his role, besides the fact that he's just a traditional point guard, which I think they want with that second unit. I think Nix sort of understands his limitations, whereas sometimes with Josh, he can get a little bit out of control, do too much. We saw this at times in Summer League when fans wanted Jabari and Tari Eason to get many more shots and creation opportunities than they actually got. And so I think for the Rockets and Stephen Silas, it's sort of like, well, do I want the less talented player that's more understanding of his role, or the more talented player that isn't as good of a fit as they want, perhaps a round peg into a square hole, if you will? And, my argument is that it's worth trying the fit approach, but if it continues to not work, at some point you just need to err on the side of talent and say, you know what, we invested more in Josh Christopher for a reason, and we just need to see what we have in him. And as far as the fact that he's not a pure floor general, that's true. But now that you're seeing a bit more staggering with KPJ and Jalen, also we've seen Jason Tate and Eric Gordon play with those second units, and they can handle the ball and facilitate to some extent. Perhaps you don't have to have a traditional throwback floor general point guard, which Daishen Nix is and Josh Christopher isn't. So when we're talking about those minutes, and that's sort of the last spot in the rotation, we're generally just talking, 12 minutes or so per game there. But how long of a leash would you give Daishen before you say, you know what, even if he sort of stays within himself a bit more than Josh Christopher, look, Josh is the more talented player, it's year 2, and we need to see what we have in him. When I say we, I mean the Rockets organizationally. I guess for me, I might play it out another week or 2, but I would not go that long. If Daishen's play doesn't improve at some point, to me, and at some point relatively soon, because of the incentive, again, the same as Usman, to sort of form a judgment by the end of this season, not a long-term judgment, but at least to have an idea of, hey, a year from now when you're trying to win, is this guy potentially a rotation player for you on a team that is perhaps pushing for a playoff spot or at least a play-in spot? So you want to see what you have in him. For me, I guess my answer, I wouldn't do it right now. Clearly, they see something in Daishen Nix. We've heard it for months. There was the quote from Jonathan Fagan that the Rockets view Nix as a lottery-type talent. Clearly, they've seen something in the G League and in practices. We can't act like that it's coming from nowhere. Clearly, they've seen something. But I guess in the grand scheme, I would give it a few more games. But in general, my leash would be fairly short before I would give those minutes to Josh. Where do you come down on
that? Well, how about neither? That's my answer. I wouldn't play either. I think
really,
if Josh is not playing the role that you want him to play, I think you can't have it both ways. You can't say that Stephen Silas is not holding X player accountable and then also complain when it seems like they are somewhat holding Josh accountable for him being a little bit of a ball hawk so far. I think if that's something that they've identified, I appreciate that they're doing it. And so I don't think the answer is to bring Josh back. On the other hand, I think the idea of Daishen Nix is a lot better than what Daishen Nix actually is.
I agree.
I'm sorry to be negative, Nancy, but what has he been doing well when he's played in the actual NBA? Going back to last season, which is not really fair because he didn't get a lot of minutes, but going back to last season and this season, he's been a turnover machine. He's not a good defender. His best skill, which you could consider an NBA level skill, is drawing contact on drives and getting to the line, but then he's a terrible free throw shooter. And so to me, it's neither of them. To me, you run Jason Tate as the backup point guard.
Interesting, because that's what I was going to ask: is what do you do for ball handling?
Yeah, I would have Jason Tate bringing the ball up. There's some pluses to it. He seems to have more urgency bringing the ball up the floor. We know Silas wants the fast-paced offense, and he helps with that. In general, it's easier to play Jason Tate if he's always involved in the action where the ball is at. What I mean by this is, if you have him as a 3-and-D wing off the ball, his shooting is a big problem. If you have him running the pick and roll, or being the roll man on a pick and roll, or doing a dribble handoff, his lack of shooting no longer is a problem, or not nearly as much as it would be. And so he's also probably the best shot creator or self creator for himself in that second unit, as I think about it. It's Tari Eason, it's Garrison Mathews, it's KJ Martin, it's sometimes Eric Gordon, sometimes not Eric Gordon. There's whatever extra big you throw in there, whether that's Jabari being staggered or Garuba, or sometimes Boban at this point. To me, it makes sense to make him the de facto point guard there, and it's just a stopgap for when Sengun comes back. And even when Sengun comes back, he can just bring the ball up the floor and run the set to get Sengun the post touch or the elbow touch, whatever play you're running. I think he's probably the best ball handler of the second unit. I think Eric Gordon gets to tunnel vision sometimes. I think Daishen does as well, but less so. And I think if you trust him with that and you tell him, hey, like, we're struggling with this, we need you to be the backup point guard of this unit. I think that's the best option until you think Josh is ready to come in with a different mindset. And the other option, which isn't available right now, is you could give Ty a shot. Not right now, and probably not
he has the
until
knee sprain.
Yeah, not until he's fully healthy again, but eventually. I'm just overall a lot lower on Daishen Nix. And for both this question and the Bruno question before, which are kind of similar when it comes to just plug and play with the rotation, there's always the chance to use one of your 2A spots to go get base level archetype of a guy.
Yeah.
Jared Butler still doesn't have a team. He is a prototypical point guard.
Yeah, I don't think that Trevor Hudgens is viewed as a guy that you can't lose.
Exactly, and he's very much in that Chris Clemons type, and he doesn't seem to be a great playmaker. He's more of a more of a shooter.
Right.
And so there are guys out
that
there
spot potentially. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Both for the backup point guard position. I don't think they're going to get rid of Darius Days. I think he's an interesting prospect.
Yeah, I do too. I like him.
But with the Trevor Hudgens spot, you can decide to go for a point guard like Jared Butler, who I'm big on. Everybody on Twitter knows I thought he was a first round pick, and then he had that heart condition, and he slipped. He was 2 years ago the best player on the NCAA champions, and that's gotta be worth something. He was with the Jazz for a bit, and he didn't really find his way, but that's one option. There's thousands of pick and roll lob threat picks. You have one in the G League in Willie Cauley-Stein if that's the way you want to go. So if you're just looking for a stopgap for a couple of weeks until some of these injuries go by, until Fernando's back, then that could, or Tai is back, then that could make sense as well. That's very much what 2A spots can be used for. A lot of the times teams just discard them as, hey, this is like how we're going to get higher value G League prospects because a 2A contract pays more than just a G League contract. It can also be used to help the main team. So especially when injuries come along. So that's another way you could judge it.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, to circle back to, I guess, the start of that question, we're talking about Daishen and Josh and who you run, if either, as your backup guard. And of course, you made the case for perhaps thinking of Jae'Sean Tate as your backup point guard. The other thing that's easy to forget is that Alperen Sengun has not played the last 2 games. That's something that's an important bit of context. That's 40% of your sample. So all of this, analysis we've done this episode as far as the first 5 games of the season and the stats, what they have and haven't done, Sengun is a guy that you think of as one of your main hubs, and he's missed 40% of your sample. And that's really your 2 easier games of the sample, the 2 against Utah. So perhaps things look a little bit different, and we know that Sengun can be a bit of a hub offensively. And that's something that perhaps if you have a guy, even if he's a center, that can distribute the ball, then maybe that makes it less relevant to have, or easier to survive without a guard like Daishen or Josh, having one of them in your rotation. So perhaps that plays into it as well. Paulo, before we sign off, any final thoughts, last words for our audience as far as what you've seen from the first 5 games or what you want to see the rest of this road trip?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I don't hate the 5 out in the sense of I just think they weren't used to running it. I think
agree.
When you're running 5 out, once you get that mismatch, the purpose is to get ISO there. We saw with James Harden plenty when they were running with Russell Westbrook. The point of 5 out is you believe you have a guard or a player that can generate an advantage by himself via a mismatch. And you exploit, and that's the advantage that you gain. It's not extra space from a screen. It's not getting a guy downhill and catching a guy flat-footed. No, what you get out of 5 out is you get the maximum amount of spacing possible for one specific matchup. And they were getting them the switches that they needed. We saw Jalen Green on Markkanen. We even KP, like if you get a guy like Markkanen on a guy like KPJ or Jalen, but you space back out and you make sure you fix the spacing from whatever action you were running, and then you give the ball back to that guy and let him cook. I'm perfectly okay if they're running 5 out and they're recognizing where the mismatches are and giving the ball to those players. The problem with what we saw last night is it seemed like they weren't used to running 5 out, and they were wasting a lot of time after getting the mismatch doing other stuff and not recognizing that you already created what you wanted. So now go and capitalize on it. So I think 5 out in itself is not necessarily bad. So it's not completely out of the question starting Jabari at the 5, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to do that, you need to go with these guys back and watch some film and tell them, hey, this is the purpose of this offense.
Right.
This is what you need to be looking for it to work. And this is why it didn't work against Utah.
Yeah, and ultimately it's about building the habits. That's the thing. It's not just about that one matchup in the middle. It's about building the right habits and patterns for the other 4 players on the court. And there are ways you can succeed with a 5 out. But yeah, if you're going to do it, it needs to be something that you stick with on a bit of a longer term basis, because if you're just going to flip back whenever Bruno's back to what you tried to do the first few games of the season, then what's really the point? It's probably not worth the effort in terms of making it a focal point of your practices, your film study, that sort of thing. So some of it just depends on what your long-term plan is. I'm sure they have mapped this out to an extent, but it just comes down to resources. Yeah, you absolutely can make it work if you make the right reads and you emphasize the right things in practice. It just comes down to whether that's a good use of time, right?
Yeah, and it's about, it comes back to what I said before of try to this team is not good enough for you to be game planning against specific opponents on a very large basis. You can change too much. Yeah, you can change too much. So try to fit your schemes to your personnel and make sure that they're able to run those schemes. Don't people ask for more plays, and more plays are fine, but you need to get these guys to know what to do in certain situations for those plays to work. And people want more drive and kick game. Great. 5 out is great for drive and kick. Jalen Green is going to get by a big man 9 out of 10 times. He's not going to get time to recover. 3 out of those 9 remaining times, he's probably going to get help drawn to him, and he's probably not going to make the right pass. Right? But that's okay. That's a rep. That's something he has to improve on for next time. Those other 6 times, you accomplish what you want out of the offense, and that process is what I think is important. And that process, with be it 5 out, pick and roll, or Sengun as an offensive hub, that process is what I think has been missing these last few games, and just in stretches throughout Silas's tenure with Houston. That's what I want to see get better. Let's get. We don't have to win, right? But let's look like we know somewhat what we're doing while we're losing, and we're losing because our players aren't good enough yet to execute, rather than not even getting into the sets because they don't know what to do from the ground up, and you're changing it up too much too often.
Yep, I get it. All right, well, that's what we will be looking for when play resumes on Friday night in Portland, hopefully with the Astros up 5+ runs so that we can actually fully pay attention to the Rockets, because we feel good about where the Astros are at in Game 1 of the World Series. Folks, he is Paulo Alves. If you aren't already following him on Twitter, please do so at Paulo Alves NBA. For me, I'm Ben DuBose. Follow me on Twitter at Ben DuBose, simply my name. Also, this show, The Logger Line, it has its handle at The Logger Line. You should follow our sponsors over at Carbach Brewing as well. They have their own Twitter handle at Carbach Brewing, and this and every episode, of course, is brought to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. And you should check out our friends at Sports Talk 790 as well, because they're a long-term partner of this podcast, Sports Talk 790 on Twitter and sports790.com to get information and to listen to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. With those plugs out of the way, we'll wrap it right here. For Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.